We all want to live the life that we have dreamt about and have more than enough money so that we can work when we want to, not when we have to. We want it all, but we don't want to sacrifice it all. Enter the world of personal finance. If we can control the things that we can control really well, the idea is that we're better positioned to get through the things that we can't control so well. If we get the platform of personal finance well, I believe that we can build wealth better going forward, especially in the future that we're heading into, where costs are so much more than what they used to be. And maybe our income can't rise at that speed. We need to think creatively outside the box, be willing to make some sacrifices, yet think more about the infinite possibilities rather than minimize the finite negativities. So today, I'm fortunate enough to be catching up with Frances Cook. She's a podcaster, she's an author, she's a speaker, she's all that good stuff. And she's here with me today to share a little bit about her story as someone who's just struggled with personal finance and then turned a massive corner herself, and a little bit about podcasting and just having a candid conversation around what it's like to talk to people about money. Hope you enjoy this one. Let's get started. So, Francis, I know I've been following you for a while with the Cooking the Books podcast. It's a great sort of antidote for some of the stuff that I look into for my shows, and it kind of keeps me grounded. The personal finance journey for you, I know, has probably been a little bit more personal than professional, but it's also professional. It's kind of what you do for a living as well. So, talk to me about your journey in general and why you're into personal finance.
Yeah, it's funny because I started out so much of this was, at the beginning at least, a side project as part of my work. Because I was a journalist, which you can basically sum down to find out things you didn't know before and tell other people about it. And so when I realized that my own personal finances weren't where I wanted them to be, and that actually maybe the biggest problem in that equation was me, and I needed to know more,
Yeah.
I just thought, well, maybe I can learn about this on work time. And that was the beginning of the Cooking the Books podcast. And it has just taken over more and more and more of my life until I'm now the money chick in media circles.
Yeah.
Um, it's been a journey where I'm sure you're well aware of this. So much of quality of life and life goals are going to be determined by money. Money isn't everything. It's just that it impacts everything that does matter. And so it's an amazing space to start with, to then open up all of these other really important discussions about what's important in life and what you want to do and how you're going to achieve it. Underneath all of that, usually, is money. And I think that's what keeps me interested, is it leads to these really interesting discussions about people's lives and what's important to them and what they want to achieve. And while it's such an interesting combination of, we're all very different in terms of what works for us might be different, and what the goal might be at the end might be very different, and yet there's so much common ground within that. Often it comes down to people just want their family to be secure, or they want to be able to make sure they have some nice little joys in life, to be able to go to the supermarket and not stress out. And so it's really interesting getting into that gray zone of where we're different and where we're all the same. It's really given me the bug. I don't know that I could leave anytime soon.
So that the open-mindedness, your perspectives around the fact that there's more than one way to get there really came out in your last book, Your Money, Your Future. Talk to me about the inspiration for that. Like, is that kind of what you're really chewing on still right now as a result of writing that book?
Yeah, so it was something that really came about because I wrote my first book was really a money 101 of everything I feel like the average person needs to know about money. And it was, mindset and paying off debt and getting ready to get into your first house, yada yada. All of which, is really important. But Your Money, Your Future, when I was looking at that, that's kind of, I would say, like the level two. For you feel like you're doing okay, and you feel like, you've got some pay rises and a little bit of fun money, and you're making some progress. But what you're looking at now is, what's my ideal life and how do I want to get there? And that's where money is really powerful, that it can fuel these big hopes and dreams. And it really, I start off the book by saying, what is something that lights your soul on fire? What is some big, shiny goal that if you actually thought that was within reach, you'd be willing to do what it took to get there. And for some people, it will be never working again a day of their life. Or for some people, it might be taking a year off work and just going traveling and seeing every country that they've wanted to see. For another person, it could be, I want to have kids and I don't want to stop work forever. But for the first 5 years of my kid's life, I want to be there every day. And all of those things will take money. But the thing is, you can make changes that will get you there and make those things possible while still being on an average income. These goals are actually closer than a lot of people realize. It's just you have to be a bit strategic and a bit tactical to get there. And so I thought, rather than people sitting there and being like, if I won lotto, I'd do this.
Mm.
No, how can you get there without lotto? And it's a combination of making some career moves, because obviously getting in more money always helps, but making a few career moves, making some choices there. And then how are you going to invest strategically, cut any debt that's holding you back? And actually, with a bit of time, a couple of years, and a bit of strategy, people can get closer to these big, scary, shiny goals than they realized. And I just really wanted to lay out to people, here's how you can get there. It is actually possible, even if you're a normal person.
Even if you're a normal person, that's right.
I am not a CEO.
You know, that's right. And that's good. That's awesome though. Like I think there's something to be said about the relationship between the things that you can control and the relationship between the things that you can't control. Can control,
Yeah,
can't control. And that's gonna change as you go through life and you have kids, and often we just park those dreams and hopes thinking that we'll just have to be passive and we'll have to wait until something happens to us before we can actually enter into the things that really, set our soul on fire. Is that what you said before, Francis? Set your
yeah,
soul on fire? Yeah.
yeah,
I like that because it's kind of that's the thing that's really driving us every day, but we kind of live our lives in this sort of prison effect, like where there's just all the reasons why we can't do it. And then
totally.
sometimes when we think about personal finance, that prison effect kind of makes us think that when we're in that personal finance zone of control and minimizing the negative, minimizing the expenses and budgeting and just being self-disciplined and trying harder, sometimes it doesn't spark much joy there either. And so that's why I think it's so important to think about the infinite. And I think that in your latest book, you kind of touch on that a little bit, don't you? That it's far more
Mhm.
important to think about maximizing the income. And
Yes.
I've heard you talk about this on your podcast a lot. Do you want to maybe give me an example of what you mean by that? And just touch on that a bit
Yeah,
more?
and I mean, I love, it is important to cut back sometimes. It is important to have a budget that you keep an eye on, and yeah, but that doesn't get anyone excited. I mean, I'm
No,
pretty sure at that
that's right.
sentence a whole bunch of people went, you know?
Yeah.
And A, cutting back doesn't excite anyone, but B, there's only so much you can cut back. And I'm sure any of us who've gone to the supermarket recently and had to buy food for our family because we've all got to eat, you come out of there and you've just spent a bomb. And what are you going to do about that? Okay, maybe there'll be some slightly cheaper places where you can save 10% off your groceries. You've still got to spend the other 90%. So there is only so much you can ever cut back, even if you're being really smart. Whereas there's no ceiling on how much you can earn. So the good thing about a budget and cutting back is you can do that immediately, and you can check out your bills, make sure you're getting the best price, yada, yada, yada. But if you are willing to also put in that longer term effort of, okay, how am I going to earn some more? What are the promotions I'm going to go for? What are the career changes I'm going to make? Do I want to start a side hustle? Side hustles are controversial in my eyes, because I don't think you shouldn't need to be constantly working every hour of every day just to get by in life. But they can be really good for a bit of a sprint effort, to get some more money coming in the door for a short term. They can also be a really good way if you want to start a business, which is a fantastic earner for a lot of people, but risky because most businesses fail. Start it as a side hustle, So there's all sorts of ways you can look at increasing your income. And I think, keep an eye on where your money is going. Make sure you're spending your money smartly. Decide what's important to you. Make sure that other unimportant things aren't soaking up your money and getting in the way. All of that is good stuff. But if you can then focus more of your effort, set and forget the budget, focus more of your effort on, okay, now how am I going to earn more? How am I going to get more coming in the door? You can achieve so much more when you've got more money coming in the door. Of course you can.
Of course. Yeah, and again, it just goes back down to where you gonna focus your attention. Are you gonna focus it on the infinite or the finite? And
Totally.
everybody's ability to do that will be different, but I think that's the good thing about, I think, where we're at in the world right now. Like, a lot of people
Mm.
look to the future with a lot of anxiety and fear, especially with property. Are my kids ever gonna get into the property market and all that sort of stuff? But I think there's actually a lot to be said about the technology revolution that's occurring at the moment, and how that's decentralized, and how people like you and I can probably implement things even just by doing podcasting. I've been learning about this a
Mm.
lot this week. Little things that I could start to implement to make the process easier to save time. And when you're in business, saving time is equal to making more money. And it's
Totally.
it's that whole kind of concept of focusing on the finite, not to diminish the fact that saving money on things, especially consumables, that's still a very good idea. And in your world, I know that I'd be curious to know if you still do this. I know that you're really into recycled clothing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Are you still really into that? And what can you tell us about that?
Pretty much every bit of clothing I have by now is secondhand.
Right.
I
Tell me
started
it's not
this
the
as
underwear. Tell me it's not the underwear, Frank. Come on.
except the underwear. Also
Thank you.
bathing suits, those
Oh
can
yeah.
be new as well.
Yes, good. That's the rules.
Um, but yeah, it's something I started as a New Year's challenge in 2020 because little did I know that 2020 would be quite challenging enough. But,
Yeah.
beginning of the year, we didn't know yet. So I set this as a little challenge. I was like, I'm going to see if I can only buy secondhand this entire year. And the thinking was, whenever I do talk to people about budgets, I say just keep a money diary for 1 week, longer if you can, but a week is a good start, and you'll see where your money is going. Next to everything you spend, how much did you need to spend it, and also how happy did it make you? Because that's all of this is about, right? That a good budget is not about living the most frugal, deprived life that you can. A good budget is about enabling what makes your life happy and living a life that brings you joy, because frankly, none of us are promised a single day. I don't want some technically awesome budget that then makes you really miserable. There's no point. Also, you won't stick to it. But within the things that make you happy, I also like to then look at it and say, well, is there a smarter way you can indulge those happy hits? And I am a vain girl. I like to have lots of clothes. My husband is, I think he's got two hangers in the wardrobe currently, shoved right to the back, and
Nice.
the rest is all
Poor guy.
me.
Right. He's got the garage though, right? He's got the garage, surely.
Well, yeah. It's a
No?
mess. So
Okay.
maybe that's why I don't let him in the wardrobe.
Right.
um I look at the clothes and I was like, okay, well, let's see if I can do this secondhand, and I just have never looked back. It's now been 3 years and everything I do is secondhand. um and it's a real hack in terms of I get to buy all the pretty things I want. I've never felt short of options.
Mm.
And I'm doing it for much cheaper. So I always think as well, I'm not going to spend anything I don't have to, because all of that can go into things like investing into shares. Um, so that I can again be boosting my wealth and boosting future income streams.
Yeah. Makes sense. You're just cutting back spending on dumb stuff, and you're spending on things that actually create some value, either happiness or future spending options where you don't have to go to work, trade your hours for time, right? So it's great. I guess as
Exactly.
long as we're making small improvements, we're doing more good than bad. We might not be perfect right now, but at least we're moving in the right direction. That's kind of the idea, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. And it's quite funny, when you were saying before about in business, when time is worth money, I always think as well, with a lot of these things, when people are talking about ways that they save money, a lot of them do take time.
Mm,
And I just want to also remind people on that front that your time is worth something. So as you start to earn more, you might not find it worthwhile anymore to do some of the things that have saved you money in the past, because you are now earning at an hourly rate. That means whatever you're saving there, in having to put in the time and make these savings, then it's not worth it anymore, because you could have been spending that time out earning your higher hourly rate. So
Mm.
I think, you want to think about this when you're looking for earning opportunities as well. A lot of these sort of side hustle hacks, your Uber or whatever, I like to think of things like Uber Eats or Uber as a starter side hustle. If you're looking for ways to increase your income, they're fine, but you're actually not earning a heck of a lot. So they're a good place to start while you're thinking of other ideas, and then they will get more money coming in the door. They're fine. But what you're looking for is moonshot opportunities, places where you can earn a lot. And so you want to always be thinking about how much time is this taking me? How much is my time worth? And how can I make my time worth more? And that's always the equation I'm looking at. People will always offer you itsy bitsy jobs for itsy bitsy amounts of money. That's fine, but look for the moonshot opportunities. Look for the places where it might be a bit of a risk, but that's the great thing about if you're doing anything on the side, you've got your main job as your stability. Look for something that may or may not pay off, but if it does pay off, it'll be a big payoff. And those sorts of opportunities can be huge for your
Oh,
future.
yeah. That's a really, really good way of putting it, and I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, and we were talking about this in the context of a core satellite structure with their
Yes.
investments, and we kind of flipped that over and talked about a core satellite approach with their income generation, where they have their majority job, but then they have a couple of moonshot activities that don't take too much of their time, but hopefully, at least there's the opportunity for outperformance in the long run. And it's such a great way to frame it, right? Because you're saying the exact same thing, because you're really allocating the bulk of your time to the thing that you know is going to give you a payoff, just like everybody else will. That's their job. But you're starting to allocate towards these higher risk pots. Now, that's not true for everybody. Like if you're full on self-employed, for myself, self-employed my entire life, I'm living in the satellites all the time and I
Yeah.
don't have a core, right? So it's not relevant for everybody, but that can actually be a good transition, and especially thinking about the rising cost of living, higher mortgage rates. I don't think it's going to get a lot easier necessarily. Some people might not like that, hearing that, but it's not necessarily going to get easier covering these rising costs. So we're going to have to start thinking about this more. And I can see that you're thinking about that more as well. Is that a common theme that you're picking up from your audience as well? Just this desire to really increase their income to get ahead of things?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I know and love the core satellite approach for investing. I had not thought of that label on career, and I
You can take
so
it. You
agree.
take it.
It's
Put it in your
really,
third
really
book, Francis. There you
yeah.
go.
I'm taking it, I'm monetizing it, and you're getting
There you go.
nothing.
There you go. That's fine. I don't mind. I got all I need right now. There you go. You heard it here first.
Um, but it is that's so true that that's one of the great things. I mean, I always say, I mean, people rip on 9 to 5s. A 9 to 5 is fantastic in terms of it gives you that stable, secure core from which to then go out and try other things. Try and look for those moonshot opportunities. And as you say, you're someone who lives in the satellite, you're self-employed. But, if someone wants to go for that self-employed life, it can be an amazing way to increase income opportunities. You don't have some middle manager over you taking credit for your work, and also half of the revenue you bring in, it's all yours, but it is also all the risk is all yours. And you can use those 9 to 5s to test out those opportunities and see if you can do the self-employed life. That can be your way in. And then maybe you will go and live in the satellite, but you've tested it first. So I
Mm,
think, yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, I am seeing more people interested in this, and a bit over the idea of, oh, if you drink coffee then you're literally peeing your money down the drain. I think we
yeah.
all know that the reason people can't afford a house isn't because they've had a coffee once a week. It's ridiculous and it's patronizing. Whereas if you can find ways to boost your income, if you look for a $300 opportunity rather than worrying about a $3 cost, that's where the magic lies. And I think
Mm,
more and more people are catching on to that.
mm, yeah. And you're allowed to change your views, right? Like, and what you just said before, like I know listening to some of your earlier episodes when you're just
Mhm.
starting out, maybe you might have taken a different view on that. And that's totally understandable for all of us, right? Like, even myself, I
Mhm.
find my views are consistently getting layered with conflicting views. It's like a sandwich of conflicting views that I have to eat daily. And makes me sick half the conversations I have to keep my mind open when I don't necessarily
Yeah.
agree with it. But how much of that do you feel has been because of the podcast that you do? Just to take a slight tangent here, like how much of the podcast has taught you to challenge your existing belief set and expand it?
Yeah, and I think it's really, I mean, this is going to sound a bit naff because I'm going to use a phrase that's a bit overused, but bear with me. Getting into that sort of abundance mindset, where I don't necessarily automatically come from an abundance mindset. I sometimes can feel a bit like there are limited opportunities, when you have to hold on tight onto what you have, and it's easier to cut back and hold on. Training myself into that abundance mindset of, if you don't have enough, go and look for more, has been really key for my own journey, I think. And some of it is from the podcast and talking to people. Some of it is from reading a whole bunch of books behind the scenes. Some of it is from social media. I talk to people a lot on social media about money and their own various journeys with it, and what's important to them. And social media can be a bit of an echo chamber. You have to be quite careful about it. You have to take it with a big dose of salt, but it's also a really useful way to stay grounded on what is important to the average person and what struggles different people are having and how they are also overcoming them, because there's a few different risks with doing what I do. One of the things is, when I talk to people on the podcast, not everyone. I'm talking to sort of more regular New Zealanders, talking personal stories a bit more these days. But you there's a lot of talking to experts, talking to fund managers, talking to in other areas of my work, talking to CEOs of big companies. So these people are paid a lot of money and handling big amounts of money. It is extremely easy to get out of touch with what's going on with the average person. And that's probably my biggest fear, is losing touch with that, of what's happening for the average person and what their big concerns are. And so talking to people on social media, if you say something dumb and you haven't thought through, say like, oh, if you want to buy a house, just hit up the bank of mum and dad. You will get nailed, and deservedly so, by people saying, well, actually, I don't have rich parents and that's not an option for me. And it's really good to have that check and balance. And thankfully,
Hmm.
I haven't had too many instances where people have full on yelled at me, but like there have been times where people have said, don't know if you're thinking this all the way through, of how this might impact various people in various situations. It does keep you humble. So I think, yeah, a combination of talking to experts on the podcast, reading a bunch of books, reading different strategies, and talking to people constantly on social media at different events I go to. It's it's a lot, but I do think you can never have too much information, because it's a complicated topic and it applies to different people in very different ways.
It sure does. If it's your audience that you're trying to serve, yeah, you kind of have to kind
Mm.
of almost go there before they go there, right?
Mhm.
Which is fine if that's where you want to go, but
Yeah.
if you don't, that's where the problem is, right? I guess we all struggle with that when we put out any sort of opinion. It's not going to be for everybody, but if we didn't have that opinion, you're not going to actually. So it's that balance, right? It's a tough one, but
100%. Yeah. I know it's really tricky. The way I deal with it is often because I'm putting out strategies and different things for people all the time. And the
yeah.
way that I often will try to deal with it is just to get ahead of it. And I recently put out a little real TikTok thing on Instagram and TikTok, saying, 5 ways that you can look for places to boost your first home deposit. Now, this is already a touchy subject, because anyone who feels locked out of the housing market, this is not an easy subject for them. This is emotional and it's often very difficult. They might have been struggling for years. So people are already ready to jump down your throat about this because they're sick of being patronized on the subject. But, one of the ways that you can boost it, and that a lot of people get into the first home, is help from their mum and dad. And so I literally just said, look, this one is controversial. Not everyone has access to it, but I have to mention it. If you have access to help from your mum and dad, that will really help. And I think it's just being aware of the fact that, look, this is a strategy. It won't work for everyone, But if it works for you, you should look into it because it will help. And I think
Mm,
as long as you're willing to acknowledge those things, that goes a long way with people.
mm. And what about the mindset piece? Like, do you often
Mm.
you mentioned the abundance mentality before, and like that's something that for me, perhaps, probably at a certain point in my career as well, I probably had to flick the switch and think more about that as well as, hey, it's probably better to pursue something which is more than enough rather than just enough. But again, not everybody is there, right? Like, not
Mhm.
everybody will get that, and it's a blockage, and it's kind of like my belief is that it sometimes holds people back. If they don't have some breakthrough in that, they're probably not going to get it before they can imagine it. But
Mhm.
to say that can actually really offend people, and
Yes.
that's the thing. Like, you and I are out there, and so many other people who are, I guess, what you would call finfluencers are out there, and we're trying to impart some insights. You're gleaning a lot from your interactions on social media. I glean a lot from the one-on-one interactions I have with people, and we're sharing these insights because we believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but we believe that we should actually share it, democratize these little insights that can actually build improvements in people's lives. But yeah, it can be a bit hard, right? When people kind of push back, and you're really just trying to expand their mentality a little bit, but not everybody's ready for it. Do you sometimes kind of struggle with that? Do you find you have to kind of pull back a little bit on some of your opinions because of that?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that helps me with this is remembering it's not at all personal. Even if someone does yell at me, it's often anything but me that's really being yelled at. Because money is tied up in so many things that are very deeply fragile parts of ourselves. It's not, when you ask someone how much they earn, that's not what they hear. It's how much are you worth? How
Right, right.
important are you? And there's these are parts of every money conversation. So you are getting into a very sensitive, very delicate part of
Mm,
people as soon as you're talking money. And so you do have to tread carefully, but also if you don't tell people how they can make changes, then you're not helping them either. There is a line there. And I think one of the biggest money mindset changes people can make is moving from that won't work for me
mm,
to that won't work for me, but how can I adapt it? you know, and being ready
mhm.
to be like, okay, what can I take from this lesson that does work for me? And that's really powerful. But it often takes a while to get there because that means you're coming from a place where you're not reacting emotionally, which means money probably isn't as stressful for you as it was, which means you're not as upset by money as you were, which means you're probably not dealing with really big payday loans hanging over you, or you might be earning slightly more so that you're not stressed about every single trip to the supermarket anymore. So you kind of have to meet people where they are and remember that when these things get taken personally, it's because life is hard, and money can be really hard and really sensitive. And if you can just give as calmly as you can and not to respond when sometimes these things go a little wrong, as calmly as you can, give the tools that help with those immediate problems so that they start to feel more in control and they start to feel like some of those immediate money problems are taken care of. Then they're ready to hear more of the things that could improve their life long term. But you just have to remember that so much of it is not personal, even when it feels personal, because it's not fun having someone yell at you. But it's so much more to do with, if you were able to take a look into the stresses in that person's life, you would probably absolutely excuse them yelling at you
Totally.
because there's probably a
Yeah.
lot happening that's very hard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the money is kinda just like an imprint, or it's a trail of breadcrumbs to describe what's going on
Mm,
in their lives, right? Yeah. So
totally.
I'm curious, like, moving away from the mindset piece and just thinking about the investment strategy that you employ, and you don't have to
Mm,
share everything here, but going back to that core satellite framework and thinking about passive investing, you, along with a lot of people that are into personal finance in a big way, are massive fans of passive investment strategies. And
mhm.
I was just wondering if you wanted to share anything around that, like how you actually select the funds that you invest in, where do you go, what's important to you? Why don't you just share a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of the share market, of stocks. Um, property investment isn't for me at this stage of my life. I would never rule anything out 100%, but it's just a more hands-on investment. I simply do not have the time. I cannot be bothered.
Yeah.
So I tend to prefer big ETFs or index funds. And one of the big things for me is I really like good international exposure because your job is based in wherever you live. Your house, if you hopefully are a homeowner, is based where you live. If you get into property investment, that is usually within the same country. So many of your wealth building, of your income opportunities are based in the country, if not the city that you live in. So I love to take advantage of the fact that the share market, the stock market makes it so easy to get that international exposure. So getting into other markets. And then also, despite the fact that I said that I don't want to get into property investment, I do love a good REIT, a good listed property fund, because again, it gives you exposure to the different sides of property. You know, most people get into investment property and they're thinking residential, but I much
Mhm.
prefer things like commercial. I think that's a much better opportunity for most people. You can get into that very easily through shares and funds. And again, it's international exposure. So I'm looking for the biggest, widest exposure I can, chuck my money in, leave it alone. Hopefully it does good things.
Yeah. Let the power of compounding do the heavy lifting and sit back and chillax. It's good.
Sit back and focus on my earning opportunities.
That's right. That's right. So as we come in for a landing, I know that you've probably got a huge like spectrum of people on with your audience with Cooking the Books podcast,
Mm.
but where are you thinking of taking things just generally with you? Are you going to be working on your third book? Are you going to take the podcast in a different direction? What are you thinking?
I know it's really funny. I actually had a meeting with Penguin a couple of weeks ago, my publisher, and they were like, "We'd love another book." I was like, "Yep, little short on time. See what
Yeah.
I can do." Nice to be wanted, though. Um,
Well, maybe you could write
yeah,
a children's book, right? You've got a little 18-month-year-old. Maybe that could be a little side hustle on your side hustle.
do some cute little rhyming things about money.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we could have a bee theme: money, honey. What else rhymes with
There you
money?
go. That's
Um,
funny.
we're already there. We're half written.
Man, we're geniuses
Um,
today, aren't we? That's great. Oh dear. But yeah, with the
um,
podcast, like where do you think you might take the podcast? Is it just continue pressing on in that direction? Like I was listening to a really good one on the way to work this morning where you're just interviewing regular people that have
mm,
made some good decisions and made some tough decisions. But
yeah.
it's really nice just hearing people's stories. Are you thinking of doing more the story sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's so hard to get, quote unquote "real people," to
Yeah.
come and share their
We want to
money
talk about it, right?
chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because it is like everything we've said already, you know, you're very vulnerable. And also people love to rip on other people who share their money story. And so everyone knows, you know, there's going to be some comments on this that are going to be rude, you know. And so it's quite a lot to convince people to come on the podcast. But I think it's so
Yeah.
powerful when people do. And so I am looking for more of those stories. If anyone wants to offer to come on the podcast and talk to me about their money journey, I'd love to
Yeah.
talk to you.
Sure there is.
Um, because, you know, we talk to experts all the time, and those interviews aren't going anywhere. That we'll keep doing those about different investing strategies and what's happening with various asset classes. That's all good, important stuff. But when you have these other interviews sprinkled through of what regular people are doing and how they're making it work, I think it's that, you know, when I was saying before about the mindset of, okay, this might not work for me, but how can I adapt it to my situation so that this version of it does work for me? And you hear other people doing that, and you hear the various ways people have put these strategies into practice. It makes it so much more real. It's really powerful. And then you can also hear the results as well of how it was so worth it for them and the difference it made for their family and how they live their lives now and how much less stress they have because they changed just a couple of things and then gave it a couple of years to take effect. And it's the old thing of people overestimate what they could achieve in a year and underestimate what they could achieve in 5 years. You know, if you make a little change and give it 5 years to bed in, you can be living a totally different life. And I think when you start to hear these stories from people who've done that, it is so motivating. I find it really motivating.
Mhm.
So I'd
Mhm.
love a few more of those. I will keep hunting for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. I'm sure you'll pick up a few more. And I think like on the other side of that, people when they are learning about finance, obviously they're there because they're ready to be challenged and ready to be spoken to. And I personally believe that it's good to have a almost like a core satellite framework of your listening options
Yeah.
as well, where you have some plain vanilla broad spectrum opinions thrown in the mix with some fringe ones around the edges. And so on that, where can people follow you? Twitter handles, you name it, go for it.
So I am hideously online. So you can find me Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok is Francis Cook NZ. Don't forget that Francis is spelled with an E because I am a girl. You can also follow the Cooking the Books podcast. And I also write for Business Desk and the Herald if you would like to go old school.
Old school, but professional. That's good. Awesome. All right, Francis, really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day today.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. Lovely chatting.
Awesome. Cheers.